everyone, and welcome to another edition of Bluecoat Talks today. My name is Amy Henson. I am a staff scientist at Science North, and I am so excited for who we're talking with today. And it's not only because I'm a marine biologist and we're going to be delving into the ocean, but he's also a very good friend of mine and a very good friend of Science North. We go back, a good almost 10 years now in terms of our connection with him. And I am super excited to introduce to everybody today, Dr. George Matsumoto. Hi, George. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Thank you, Amy. And thank you so much for inviting me to come out and chat with you today.
Excellent. So a few years ago, I'm going to give everybody kind of a background as to how we know you and why we're connecting with you today. So a few years ago, probably, about 10 years ago, we opened a new exhibit at Science North that was called Creatures of the Abyss. And it was all about the deep ocean. So, giants and mysterious fish of deep and hydrothermal vents and all the really interesting things and things that we're still exploring and the things that we don't know about our deep ocean. And that's where we connected with George and where he works. And George, why don't you give us a little introduction as to where you work and what you do?
Absolutely. So I work at the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. It's a nonprofit research organization based in Monterey, California, so on the west coast of North America, about 2 hours south of San Francisco. And the reason we're here is because there's a submarine canyon, a canyon that goes down under the surface of the ocean about 4,000 meters. It's the largest submarine canyon on the west coast of North America. And as a nonprofit research organization, we have 3 research boats, we have remotely operated vehicles, we have autonomous underwater vehicles, and we have an incredible staff of engineers and scientists and a full support staff devoted to learning and exploring more about the ocean.
That's awesome. So you're in California right now. You're on the coast of California. It should be
That
warm in
it,
California right now. I mean, it's
it
warm
is
here in
warm,
Sudbury. I
sure.
mean, I'm outside in my backyard, but it looks like it's snowing behind you. So maybe explain just a little bit as to why it looks like it's snowing behind you.
That's a great observation, Amy. It does look like it's snowing behind me. And in fact, the snow that you see behind me is, well, that's what we call it. We call it marine snow. And here in Monterey, we have an enormously productive ocean. And all that food and all those particles and all the things that live in the ocean sort of slough off sometimes, mucus and other things, and that drift down through the water column. So what you're seeing behind me is an example of what we call marine snow. And it's constantly raining down or drifting down in the ocean from the surface all the way down to the bottom. And it's a really important source of carbon into the deep sea.
That's really. I had a little gross moment though of thinking of fish mucus like raining down on you. It was
Yeah,
kind of
the
funny.
fish mucus would be the optimal choice. There are lots of other things drifting down that you may not want to hear about.
No, not at all, right? Oh my goodness. Well, we're super excited to talk to you today. And I really want all of our viewers today, if you have a question of anything about the ocean, about the deep ocean, George has been on some really fantastic research adventures and he's here to answer any questions that you might have. He has an entire library with him today of videos and photos that he's willing to pull up and share with us. And so if you have any questions at all about the ocean or anything, you can put them into the comments. They'll pop up, we'll see them, and I'll ask them for you. And you can even leave your name there if you want, and your age maybe if you'd like to, and George would be more than happy to answer them. So why are we connecting with you today, George? And this is what I really wanted people to really understand about why we're connecting 10 years after we've been friends. But we have a really exciting project that's going on between Science North and Mbari. And this project all has to do with the climate change show that we have at Science North. And we have right now part of it. There's Sheepy. I see him. See, George has his own Sheepy. Mine, unfortunately, is back at Science North in the building, but he brought his with him. And this show, it has been around for Science North for a really long time because climate change is such an important issue that we want to talk about, that we want to engage people in. And right now, Science North is developing the third climate change show. And we're doing that with scientists from all over the world, which is really, really exciting. And one of those scientists and groups of scientists is George, right? And we have worked connecting with George of having real live scientific data being fed into this new show that we are going to be opening, hopefully really, really soon. So I can't wait to hear about this. We have a float that's in the ocean, don't we, George?
That's right. And in fact, Sheepy and I were down in Australia at the beginning of the year, hoping to actually go out and deploy the float personally. But unfortunately, we had to leave the ship because of the quarantine. But the float continued. And so Sheepy and I went down there. I'll share a picture of the float. This is what the float looks like. And you can see that it's a beautiful float. The artwork I can't really speak for because the artwork could have been quite a bit better. So my apologies for that.
I think it's great.
We did take Sheepy down with us, obviously. So you can see Sheepy down there, and Sheepy was my inspiration. But the float is designed to go down under the surface of the ocean and stay there for up to 5 years. And if you look at this picture right here, what you see is sort of a graphic showing these floats under the surface of the ocean. They stay down there at 1,000 meters, and then every 10 days they dip down to 2,000 meters, and then do a water column profile all the way up to the surface. And then once they get to the surface, they send information back to a satellite up above, and all that information comes back to us on shore. And I have a little animation of how that might work if you want.
Yeah, let's take a look.
I could play that for you.
Yeah.
So these floats are just amazing floats. They provide year-round information. They let us get data from places where it's really hard to get data year-round because of the winter storms are so fierce. Sometimes you can't do any research down there. So these floats will stay down there and keep working all year round as long as they could get up to the surface. They actually have a specially designed sensor, the temperature sensor. So as they come up to the surface, if it seems like it's getting a little bit too cold up near the surface, like maybe there's ice up there, the float will stop and go back down and stay down and keep trying until there's no more sea ice above it, because we don't want it to hit the surface, hit the ice and break some of these delicate sensors. So Sheepy is actually down there right now and sending back data and sending back information. And I could even pull up an image of where Sheepy is right now.
Oh, that's fantastic, because it's not near California, right?
Oh, no, it's nowhere near California.
Yeah, so let's take a look.
So let's see if I could share this here. So this right here is a website showing all the different floats that have been adopted. And you can see down here, if we go.
There, George.
Oh, you don't have it?
Oh, I think we've got something else.
Let's see. What did you got something else? Well, that's exactly what it was.
Oh, sorry.
So
okay, sorry.
Those are all the floats that have been adopted.
Oh, interesting. Okay, sorry.
Is that the one I sent?
Yeah.
So these are all floats that are out there.
There we go.
And these are all named. And so if you see, let's see, I'll highlight Science North right here.
Ah, there we are.
And you have a float called Sheepy. And we could actually take a look over here at, here, let's see. That's the one I was looking for. So here's a graphic. Antarctica's down here, down in the center of the screen. And all these floats you see here, the green and the red dots, are some of the SOCOM floats. And SOCOM stands for the Southern Ocean Climate Observation and Modeling Program. And that's the program that is launched and has let Science North adopt a float. All these floats are down there right now. And if we plug in the number for Sheepy, which is in the float search, we'll see that Sheepy is right here. And so amazing. That's the location of Sheepy, and Sheepy is sending us back data. And earlier I used this little web page here to go to Sheepy, Science North, and I decided to look for a pH and the depth profile, and I asked for a plot. And if you hit that button, it calls up the plot. So here you can see Sheepy is actually going down. It's going down to 1,600 meters and collecting data. And so these are all profiles that Sheepy has been doing and collecting data and sending that back to us here.
Sweet.
So Sheepy is being really active right now, which is great.
That's fantastic. So it's really in the middle of the ocean, somewhere between the bottom of South America to the tip of Africa, in the middle of that Southern Ocean, somewhere.
That's
So it's,
right.
oh, that's fantastic. Oh, that's really neat.
And so
So,
we were very fortunate. I told you that we got sort of asked to leave the research vessel, all the science crew, and we were fortunate because the ship crew on board the ship were kind enough to launch the float for us, even though there were no scientists on board. So they launched the float for us, and it's been out there collecting data ever since.
that's fantastic. We actually have a really good question from Sophie. And Sophie's wondering if they're called floats, why are they sinking?
That is a
That's a
great
great question.
question. That is a wonderful question, actually. Um, I think they're called floats just because the profiling floats, all of these floats, they've always been called floats because they float in the water. Even though they sink, they're still floating in the water column. So this is a beautiful graphic illustration done by Karen Romano Young, a scientific illustrator. They never touch bottom. And so they're really just sort of floating, not at the surface, but sort of in the middle of the water column. And they're fully equipped. They've got all the batteries, they've got all the computers, all the sensors in it, and they move up and down in the water, but never touch the bottom and hopefully never touch the ice.
That kind of reminds me of an experiment that we've done at Science North previously called a Cartesian Diver, where you have a pop bottle and like a little syringe or something inside the bottle, and you squeeze the bottle, and the syringe goes up and down in the water column. It doesn't always go right to the bottom, but you can kind of maneuver it up and down, so it does sort of float there, but maintains either one or the other, but doesn't sink all the way down. That's really
That's
neat.
a great example. And,
Yeah.
and I've also seen in the market, sometimes you'll see these beautiful thermometers, right? Glass thermometers inside of a fluid, and the pieces of the thermometer go up and down depending on the temperature of the fluid. And again, those are just floating in the water.
That's really really neat. So what other kinds of things are these floats, like what else can she be do in the water? Like what other things is it measuring?
So some of the things that they're measuring besides pH, I showed you the pH map. They're also measuring ocean temperature and salinity, oxygen levels, nitrate levels, the pH levels, chlorophyll levels, how much productivity there is, how much photosynthesis is going on, light transmission, light intensity, just a whole suite of different parameters. And the SOCOM project is a sort of a subset of a much larger project called the ARGO program, ARGO. And the ARGO program has somewhere around 3,000 of these floats floating around the world ocean. And there's only one ocean, so they're just sort of floating around, sending back this data. The SOCOM floats are special because they add biogeochemical sensors, which are the pH and the nitrate, to that whole suite, and the chlorophyll, things that aren't always on the other floats. And so SOCOM has launched in the 5-6 years we've been operating, we've launched about 150 of the floats. We have 117 of them that have been adopted by school groups and homeschool groups all around the world. So we're very happy that Sudbury Science North is involved in our Adopt a Float program.
That's fantastic. And we're really excited too because of how it's going to connect back to our visitors at our science center later on, and I can't wait later on for us to share what this new show is all about, because it's something that we've never done before, where we've actually integrated real science into a live show that we're going to be producing, which I can't wait. It's a really exciting project that
I
we're
think
working
it's
on.
I think it's great because the data that you can see from our website is the same data that the scientists are seeing. So you're
Yeah,
seeing it at the same time we are. So it's quite possible that somebody out there might start looking at the data and come up with an observation that the scientists haven't even made yet, which to us is part of the excitement because it's
yeah,
so much data.
absolutely. Oh, that's really good. Well, Nora has a really great question as well. Nora would like to know, how exactly does the float collect this data?
Oh, that is a very good question. So if I go back to the illustration that I was showing you earlier, this SOCOM profiling float, what can it tell us and how does it do it? It's got a nitrate probe. It's called the in situ ultraviolet spectrophotometer. That's what ISIS stands for. It's turns out scientists really like acronyms because we come up with very long names and we have to make it a little bit shorter. So we've got the spectrophotometer up here, the nitrate probe, which will measure nitrate levels. And nitrate levels are really important because nitrogen turns out to be one of these elements in the ocean that is very difficult to measure typically. It usually involves a lot of lab work, and the researchers at the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, where I work, are the ones who actually developed this particular nitrate probe. It has an oxygen sensor, which measures the level of oxygen, how much oxygen is in the water. It's got an instrument called the CTD, which measures the conductivity or the salinity of the ocean, the temperature of the ocean, and also the density, which is a proxy for the pressure or the depth of the float. So that way we know we don't want to go too deep because the whole float might sort of implode. It's in a pressurized housing, but if you go too deep, the pressure of the ocean will be too much. And so the pressure sensor is part of the CTD over here on the right. And that's what helps us figure out how deep we are or how shallow we are. And then we have pH sensors. So we have a whole suite of different instruments on the float that are all recording and measuring things, and then gathering all that data on the computers inside, storing it until we could get back up to the surface and then use the antennas to talk to the satellites.
Ah, perfect. So it can all be done remotely all the time. And how long can the floats stay down for?
Oh, another good question. So the floats, we sort of think the lifetime of these floats will be about 5 years. We've had some floats that have been out there for that long and they're still working. We have had some floats that stop working a little bit earlier than that. We even have some floats that have been under ice now for almost a year.
Oh, wow.
So we're hoping they're still working, but we don't know because we can't talk to them. So it's all sort of a risk game that you play, but the benefits that are coming back are huge. Because in the Southern Ocean where these floats are being deployed, we can't get research vessels down there in the wintertime. The seas are just way, way too rough. And in fact, I could play a short video. Let's see if I could find it.
Yeah.
A short video of what the seas might look like sometimes when you're down there. So let's see if this will play.
No, much different than our local lakes, I think.
Let's see. There. Oh, that looks pretty calm. Maybe that's not the video I was looking for.
If only the Southern Ocean always looked like that, right?
Yeah, it would be nice. No, I think that's another graphic of how the float works. I have too many videos up here. Let's see if I could find, is it this one? That looks pretty calm too, huh? That one's got music. I'm going to turn down the music.
So is that one of the vessels that you would use in the...
That's one of the vessels. That's the Nathaniel Palmer, which is a United States Coast Guard breaker. It's a beautiful, beautiful research ship.
It is.
This is taken by a drone, and this is not obviously the rough period. Let's see. Oh, I found the video with the rough period. Let me see if I can find that. But the neat thing about the SOCOM project is that we are actually using ships, what we call ships of opportunity, to go down there and do the work, which means we're not actually budgeting money in our project for ship time. We're just asking our colleagues, here you get an idea of what the Southern Ocean might look like. And that's not during the winter time. So in the wintertime, it gets even worse. So it's a really, really difficult environment to work with in the wintertime. And we're just asking our colleagues all around the world that if you have a spot on your ship when you go down into this area, can you please take somebody on board that might be able to launch one of these floats? And so far, the world scientists have been very cooperative because they realize how important some of this information can be.
And a lot of them would be able to use this information as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. So
right.
All of this information is free for anybody. It's all posted online as soon as it comes in. And that's one of the things that we really value about this project. It's all funded by the National Science Foundation, but we also have additional funding from NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, as well as NASA, the National Aeronautic and Space Administration.
So here's a really good question, and it's on everybody's mind, I think, is do animals ever interfere with the floats?
Oh, that's an excellent question.
I just imagine a giant whale coming along and eating it or something.
It's really hard for us to know what's happening to these floats because we just drop them in the water and we leave them there. And as long as they're working, we're very happy. When they stop working, sometimes we don't know why. We just don't get them back. They just are gone. So we're hoping that, you know, it's not that because a giant whale has come and decided to eat it, because we don't think that will happen. Um, could it be attacked by a shark? That's a possibility, although there are not supposed to be that many sharks down there. There are killer whales down there, and that's a possibility as well. Um, but it's sort of a risk benefit game. The risks we take because the benefits that come back from these floats, the data are certainly worth it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mary. That was a really great question. It sparked my imagination. That's for that's for sure. Oh, this is actually a really great, interesting comment from Larissa. About potential of using jellyfish, so sea jellies, to monitor sections of the ocean, and they were doing some of this work at Stanford. So even sometimes we can use mechanical means, and sometimes we might be able to use biological means. That's kind of interesting.
Oh, that's kind of a neat question and one near and dear to my heart because my research focus is jellies. So that's
Oh,
what I
there we go.
really like. That's my
Oh,
favorite group of
fantastic.
animals. It turns out jellies are really hard to tag. Um,
Ah,
they don't like being tagged. I won't say they don't like being tagged, but they're really good at getting rid of any tags. So, for instance, if you put something into a jelly, like a tag, like under the skin or in the bell, they decide that it's a foreign body and they sort of slough it off. They just get rid of it. Uh,
interesting.
and so we could tag jellies short term, but it's really hard to tag a jelly long term. So some of the new research we're doing, because we want to find out what jellies do every day, and we can't follow them all day long, is we're actually working with an autonomous underwater vehicle. So this is a vehicle that goes down, there's nobody inside, there's no remote control, it's all done with artificial intelligence. And in essence, we're telling this vehicle to find the jelly and then follow it for
Oh,
days.
oh, that's really neat.
I know it's going to be really exciting. So for the first time, we'll be able to. Some people may not care what a jelly does for 24 hours, but I'm really interested.
That's fantastic. I love that. We have a question from Terry. Terry's wondering and maybe there's kind of two parts to this. What's the cost to one of those floats? And then I would also be a question of what's like the ongoing cost of that, like as you know, you have to follow it for 5 years and keep gathering that data.
Those are really good questions. And the cost for these floats, the cost has been coming down over the years because the more of them we make, the more the costs come down. But you're looking at probably somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 a float. So that's not a small amount of money. Keeping track of it means we need to have staff who are taking care and curating the data, doing the quality control of the data, making sure that the data coming back is accurate as possible, and then adjusting the data, maintaining the website. And then for the Adopt a Float program, some of my time is involved trying to work out and develop lesson plans to work with the data in the classrooms.
Oh, fantastic. And so Mike's asking, how many floats do we have out there currently within this program?
Excellent question. So SOCOM has deployed close to 150 floats so far. 117 of them have been adopted because we didn't start the Adopt a Float program until year two, because it didn't occur to us that people would be interested. But once we started, it became clear that a lot of people were interested. The Argo program, the profiling floats that Argo is deploying all over the world, has over 3,000 floats deployed.
I can't even, that's like, that is, to me, that is amazing. So when we think of, what's in our ocean right now, there are, thousands of instruments in our ocean all the time, right? And we don't think about that. There are instruments that are collecting wave data, as an example, the same type of data that our floats are collecting, and they're all bringing that information all back to us to help us with weather forecasts, et cetera, et cetera.
That's right. And to me, the neat thing about the Argo program is that it's an international effort. It's
Yeah.
being done and with researchers all over the world because science has figured out that it's critical for us to share and work together if we want to get anything done. And to me, I think that's again one of the exciting parts about science research is that researchers are willing to work together and ignore sort of geographic boundaries and political boundaries because we know that getting the data to learn more about the ocean is more important than any of that. And I just pulled up the web page for the Argo floats. So as of May 13th, there are 3,978 floats around the world ocean. And each one of the little dots you see here on this map is an Argo float.
Wow.
And then the SOCOM program, the Southern Ocean Climate Change and Modeling, Observation Modeling program that I'm working on is mostly deploying the floats around the Southern Ocean, which is the bottom part of this map.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, we had a very early question early on, and I really want to get to it, but I wanted to wait till we sort of finished talking about the floats. So Minakshi, and I hope I said that correctly, asked, is there anything new that we've discovered in the ocean? And I keep thinking there's always something new to discover in our oceans. Am I right?
You are absolutely right. And in terms of SOCOM, the float program, some of the things we're discovering are things like there's less carbon dioxide being absorbed in the Southern Ocean than we originally thought. And that will have big implications for climate change and some of the modeling we're doing. In terms of the deep sea, there are things going on. Every time we go out into the ocean in Monterey, we find new things. We find some interesting things. It may not be a brand new species, although we certainly find brand new species, but we'll always find something new when we go into the ocean. And it might be a new behavior. It might be new sort of interaction. This is a new jelly that we found several years ago. It's a very large jelly. Its scientific name is Tiburonia grandrojo, named actually by my wife because she speaks Spanish and I don't. And she had she gave me the inspiration to name that particular animal. But we find out things like feeding interactions. And these are really hard observations to come by because we don't know how these animals interact with each other in the ocean. So here, for instance, is the black-eyed squid Gonatus eating another black-eyed squid. So it turns out that in the deep sea, some animals are cannibalistic. The black-eyed squid are relatively common. They're small squid, and it turns out that pretty much everything likes to eat the black-eyed squid. And here's a much larger squid, the Humboldt squid, coming up and eating a black-eyed squid as well. But we find all sorts of things going on down there, and we're still learning about the ocean. And like you said, every time we go down there, we find out something new, like these spider crabs eating a poor jelly that's drifted down from the surface waters. And sometimes we just amuse ourselves by watching animals as they try to feed, like this little octopus who apparently was really hungry because it was trying very hard to find a meal that would last it, I don't know how many months, because it kept going after all these big animals when if they're little animals swimming all around it, but apparently it had eyes that really wanted something much larger. So we watched it for about half an hour. It had no success in that half hour, and we decided to sort of move on from that.
And then he tried several times the same animal over.
Oh yeah, he and anything by him that was bigger than him, he was willing to try.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Very, very cute.
What's been your favorite thing that you have discovered when you've gone either down in, because you've been down in a submersible, right? And
That's
you've
right.
used remote operated vehicles as well. So what's been your favorite thing that you've discovered?
Well, that's a great question. I guess to me, the excitement is in finding new things. So finding new animals, the group of animals I worked on for my research for my PhD were actually the comb jellies or the ctenophores. This particular one was in scuba range. So this one I described and worked on using scuba tanks, although we see it in the deep sea as well. And this is just a beautiful jelly, very, very delicate. You could never collect it with nets. And we see that throughout the water column. Most of these jellies, this is another new species that we're able to describe. Here's another one, the bloody belly comb jelly. All of these animals are so delicate, you just can't collect them with nets. And so to me, that's probably the most exciting part, is finding something that is new to science, something that we know are new to science. Like this little comb jelly is still an undescribed species. We don't have a name for that one yet either. So we're still learning more and more all the time when we're down there. This animal is a mollusk, a gastropod. It's a nudibranch. We call it the mystery mollusk. We found it over 12 years ago. It doesn't have a name yet, but we're hoping sometime in the next year or so we'll actually give it a name. It's taken us that long to really figure out all of its relationships because we had to use DNA. It's such a bizarre shape. It doesn't look like anything else we've ever seen. And you know, the things we see down there are just remarkable. So to me, I guess the most exciting thing is just being in the ocean, and whether it's in shallow water or deep water, the things we see and the things we're fortunate enough to be able to observe just sort of blow my mind.
We had a really good suggestion where somebody wants to name it the Christmas jellyfish, which, you know, I love,
Oh,
probably because
that
of the
red
colors, I
one.
would
That's a
imagine.
good explanation. I like that a lot.
Ctenophores are kind of interesting, these comb jellies, because how big are they? It's hard to tell when we're looking at the scale in a video.
Oh, that's a great question, because that's probably the most often asked question is how big are they? Followed shortly by how deep is that? So in terms of size, you know, something like this one is probably, let's see, it's about the size of a rugby ball, you know, bigger than a football. So it's really beefy. It's a big, thick jelly. And it uses these long, long tentacles to fish on the ocean floor. And we think it's picking up maybe some shrimp or some fish. The tentacles are incredibly sticky, as opposed to something like that bloody belly ctenophore that I showed you earlier. That's only about 6 to 8 centimeters long.
Oh, wow.
Really, you know, not too long at all. And this undescribed one, the Christmas tree one, is only about 4 centimeters, 3 to 4 centimeters. So not very big at all.
So
And to
they,
me, yeah, to me, it's remarkable that we could take a vehicle, you know, as big as a remotely operated vehicle, and you could see the people standing next to it as we deploy this. This is the Doc Ricketts. It's a 4,000 meter capable remotely operated vehicle, and it goes down into the ocean. And the pilots are so good, we could sit and watch an animal like those comb jellies, even, you know, even though it's a huge vehicle. It weighs 11,000 pounds, you know, so 5.5 tons. And the pilots steer it around these really delicate animals without disturbing them.
fantastic. So because you're such a big fan of jellies, we have a jelly question, of
Oh,
course,
good.
because we all love jellies. How many different kinds of jellies have been discovered? And maybe it's kind of interesting to maybe talk to you about the difference between, let's say, like fish, like the ones that with the bell that we're used to seeing, in the comb jellies too.
Sure. And that's a really good question. So jellies overall, there's probably well over 3,000 species, and I may be totally off on that, but that number comes to mind for some reason. And that's described and officially named, given a scientific name. There are probably equally that many that are out there that we haven't named yet. There are probably well over 1,000 of them that we know are new that we just haven't given a name to. We just haven't been able to describe them yet. And that is actually one of the big problems we have right now, is that we don't have enough students doing taxonomy, systematics. We have a huge backlog of undescribed animals down there that we still need help working on. Now, there are things like sponges. We don't really know most of these sponges down there. So this one we call the yellow sponge. We have purple sponge. We have white sponge species A. We have white sponge species B. And, this is sort of the status of a lot of what deep sea exploration is right now, is we're finding things that we're still learning about and we're trying to catalog them. Like, for instance, this is a sponge. This one, we had the nickname, the harp sponge. It's since been named. It does have a scientific name now. And this is a carnivorous sponge. So it's not filtering out the water looking for phytoplankton or plant-like plankton. It's filtering out the water and looking for food, for animals to eat.
I have never seen anything like that. That is really
there's another sponge, the ping pong sponge, because they look like ping pong balls, right? The finger sponge. I mean, this is some of the issues that we're facing right now, is we need people to come and help scientists the world over describe some of these beautiful animals that we're seeing. We know they're new, we know they're different, but we don't have the time to actually sit and give them scientific names yet.
Wow.
And so all these jellies that I'm showing you are different from comb jellies because they have what we call stinging cells or nematocysts, which are, if I play this little animation for you, the stinging cells are not as big as this animation makes it look, because the stinging cells, otherwise people would never go in the water again. But these little tiny dots on the tentacles of some of the true jellyfish have nematocysts or stinging cells that when something runs into it, like food, the stinging cells will evert, they'll inject themselves or a toxin into the tissue, allowing the jelly to eat their food without being damaged by what they're trying to eat.
And so comb jellies don't have these, right?
Comb jellies do not have those. So comb jellies, instead of stinging cells, have sticky cells. The much kinder animal. Another reason why I like to study them. And the one exception to that is the comb jelly that likes to eat other comb jellies. So it doesn't have any sticky cells. Instead, what it has is a big stomach and a huge mouth. And it's got cilia on its mouth, on the lips, that let it take bites out of other jellies. And so this ctenophore is a ctenophore eater. And inside you could see a ctenophore that's been eaten that's still sort of moving.
Kind of alive, going,
kind of alive, yes. And this animal is also kind of interesting because it makes beautiful light. It makes its own light, the bioluminescence. So if you turned off the light and then touched it, it would make this.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And it turns out that probably most of the animals in the deep sea are capable of making light. We see bioluminescence sometimes from the remote vehicle. If it's bright enough, usually the lights of the vehicle are so bright, we don't really see them. But if you're in a human-occupied vehicle and you went down without the lights, you would see beautiful bioluminescence all around you. This is a bioluminescence from a little copepod. It's a bright, bright blue. And if you were in the laboratory, you did this, it actually puts out enough light, you could almost read by it.
Oh, wow. I remember when I used to live in Atlantic Canada, there was an area in Prince Edward Island that had bioluminescent algae. And so at nighttime, we could go down and stick our hands inside the water and stir it up, and you would see all of this glow. And I always thought that was the neatest thing. It was just so
yeah. So that's, most of it's probably dinoflagellates, the phytoplankton, the algae, and that's going on right now in Southern California. So if anybody's looking at the news, the ocean is just lighting up at night with this beautiful light show, sort of an electric blue light show coming down because of the dinoflagellates in the water.
So are there any jellies on Earth that we know that aren't endangered species?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Allison's asked us this, and I'd love to know.
I don't know that there are any jellies that are considered endangered species. Jellies, for the most part, don't get a lot of attention. The exception for that will be something like the box jellyfish, which is in warm tropical areas. And the box jelly, of course, gets notoriety because the box jelly is probably the only jelly capable of killing humans. And so people are aware of the box jelly, but as far as I know, it's not endangered. Uh, and there are still undescribed species of box jellies out there as well. So good question. I don't know if there are any endangered species of jellies overall. There are jellies you see very often, like this beautiful jelly, which is a new species we found in Monterey. We called it Bumpy because it had little bumps on it. It's about the size of a softball. And we collected 5 of them and we're getting ready to describe it. And then we waited almost 10 years to describe it because for 10 years we never saw another one. And so we didn't want to describe something and then have to say in the paper, but we think we killed them all, because that wouldn't be very good. So we had to wait till we found some more, and we did not collect them. We left them in the water once we found them, and then we described the animal.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. I'm always amazed with jellies. Oh, what is that on the screen? That little mechanical part
So that's how we collect some of these delicate animals. So this is a sampler. It's essentially a hollow tube with lids on the top and bottom. The pilot flies the sampler over the animal and then closes the lids. So it's a way of collecting very, very delicate animals like jellies.
Nice. And then do you ever find when you get them up to surface, because of the pressure difference, things have changed with that animal, or?
Well, for the jellies, not so much. That because they have no air spaces, the pressure change doesn't really seem to bother them very much. Sometimes if we were to collect fish, the fish are affected by pressure changes, but we can't, it's really hard for us to collect fish because we're slow. We don't move very fast. You know, collecting sea stars is much easier because they don't move fast either. So we could pick up a sea star and put it in a drawer and bring that back. We're really good at collecting other things like rocks. We could collect rocks really easily because again, they don't move fast either. Or, you know, cores of the ocean mud, we could do that too. But things that swim fast are really difficult for us to collect. And so that's a tough one for us. Sometimes we'll even do experiments. So here's a neat little video showing us squirting some squid ink at a squid. So we're sort of curious if it would react to the squid ink, because sometimes they squirt ink and they're in a cloud of ink. And if you watch that, you see that the squid, because it thinks it's in a cloud of ink, changes and turns the color of the ink. So normally it's beautifully transparent, great way to hide yourself in the deep sea. But if you're in a cloud of ink, now you're a white thing inside of a black cloud. That's not good. But if you turn yourself black, you're invisible again.
I wish I could do that. I wish I could just, you know, change color when I wanted to know.
It'd be kind of nice to be invisible sometimes.
Yeah. Here's a really good question. Kirsty wants to know, are jellies a sustainable seafood? Because we've talked a lot about making sustainable seafood choices at both the aquarium and here at Science North, and kind of wondering, are jellies edible? Are they a sustainable type of seafood that we might be able to use as a food?
Well, jellies are certainly sustainable. Particularly the large ones that are consumed by humans. These would be some of the moon jellies or some of the big sort of barrel jellies that you get in Japan, the cannonball jellies. The problem is they don't really taste very much at all. They're sort of like tofu. They'll take the flavor of whatever it is you're cooking, but there's not a whole lot of nutrition to them either. So luckily, and I say luckily because I study jellies, there's not a whole lot of research going on how to make them more edible.
There we go. Oh, George, well, we have been at it now for a little bit, and I think what we're going to do is wrap things up. We've got one more question though, because this is a good one. Science and Claire ask us, can octopi squirt ink as well, or is it just squids that can do that?
Okay, so first I'll say octopuses.
Octopuses!
Because octopi is the incorrect plural.
Ah, there we go.
So octopuses, and yes, they can squirt ink. In fact, all the cephalopods, the octopuses, the cuttlefish, and the squid are capable of squirting ink. Not every species can do it, but most of the octopuses can.
Fantastic. That's excellent. Well, George, I am super excited about this new adventure that we're about to go on at Science North. And we can't wait to see what's going to happen with Sheepy, our Sheepy float, and where it's going to end up to next, and the data that it's going to collect not only for our visitors here at Science North, but for scientists all over the world. So we're just super excited to be a part of that, because here at Science North, we're all about helping researchers and being a part of science and getting all of you involved in science every day. So thank you so much, George. Thank you, Sheepy, for joining us today. And join us again soon here at Science North on our Facebook Live to have another adventure with Bluecoat Talks. We've got another scientist coming up very, very soon. We'll see you all then.
Thank you. That was a lot of fun.